CEO Marcus Hale had been alone for 14 months until the night his lawyer called to say his ex-wife had collapsed outside a courthouse, and the paramedics found something in her wallet that changed everything. The office on the 42nd floor of Hale Capital's Chicago headquarters was exactly the kind of place that made investors feel safe and made Marcus feel nothing. Floor-to-ceiling glass overlooking the lakefront, a desk imported from Milan that had cost more than his first car, awards on the walls that he'd stopped seeing years ago, the way you stop seeing a painting when it's hung in the same spot for too long. At 41, Marcus Hale had built one of the most respected private equity firms in the Midwest from a rented room and a borrowed laptop. He'd been profiled in Forbes twice. His mother kept both issues framed in her dining room in Naperville, right next to his law school graduation photo and a painting of the Virgin Mary. It was 11:18 p.m. on a Tuesday when his phone rang. He recognized the number. Stuart Page, his attorney. The man did not call after business hours unless something was genuinely wrong. Marcus. Stuart's voice was careful in the way only lawyers and doctors ever learn to be careful. I need you to stay calm. What happened? Lena was brought into Northwestern Memorial about 2 hours ago. She collapsed on the steps of the Daly Center. Hypoglycemia, they think, but they're still running tests. A pause. She had a card in her wallet. Medical emergency contact. Your name was still on it. Marcus was already standing, though he didn't remember getting to his feet. There's something else. Another pause, longer this time. The paramedics noted she was approximately 7 months pregnant. The city below him blurred into a smear of light. 14 months ago, Lena Vasquez had signed their divorce papers at a table in Stuart's conference room, her handwriting as steady as it had always been, the handwriting of a woman who'd spent 12 years as a federal public defender, calm under pressure, the way some people were calm as a personality trait rather than a choice. She had not cried. She had not bargained. She had thanked Stuart for his time, shaken Marcus's hand exactly once, and walked out of the building into a November afternoon without looking back. The last thing she'd said to him, 4 days before the papers were signed, was this: I don't hate you, Marcus. I just don't recognize you anymore. And I can't spend the rest of my life introducing myself to a stranger in my own home. He hadn't known what to say to that. He let her go, 7 months pregnant. The math was not complicated. The drive to Northwestern took 22 minutes. Marcus spent them remembering things he'd worked very hard not to remember. The way Lena laughed with her whole body, shoulders first, then the sound catching up. The argument they'd had the week before she left, when his mother had come to dinner and made a comment about the apartment being sparse and cold, and Lena had finally, quietly, asked Vivian Hale to stop critiquing the home she'd decorated and lived in for 6 years. Marcus had said nothing. He had poured more wine and changed the subject. He'd done that a lot by the end. Changed subjects, smoothed surfaces, kept the peace by letting Lena pay the actual cost of it. He had 14 months of silence on the subject of his own cowardice, and he'd filled them with work because work was something he was genuinely good at, and it never looked at him the way Lena had looked at him the night she packed her books. The emergency department of Northwestern Memorial smelled like antiseptic and institutional coffee. A nurse at the intake desk looked up when Marcus approached. Lena Vasquez, he said. I'm her emergency contact. The nurse checked something on her screen. She's stable, room 7, but she hesitated. She asked us not to call anyone. She had a card in her wallet. I know. The nurse's expression was not unkind. She's asking who called you. Stuart Page. Her attorney also had the form. This was half true. Stuart had seen the form when they'd filed paperwork a year ago and remembered Marcus was still listed. She's stable, you said. She is. Can I see her? The nurse looked at him for a moment with the particular judgment of someone who has seen a lot of people in waiting rooms and learned to read them quickly. Whatever she saw on Marcus's face, she nodded slowly. Room 7. But she gets to ask you to leave. Room 7 had the fluorescent half-dark of all hospital rooms. The overhead light turned low, a monitor beeping softly beside the bed. Lena was sitting up against the pillows when Marcus pushed open the door, and for a moment neither of them moved. She looked exhausted and furious, and more beautiful than he'd let himself remember. Her dark hair was loose around her shoulders. She was wearing a hospital gown and she had a bruise forming on her left forearm from the IV. Her hands were folded over the rounded swell of her stomach in the unconscious protective gesture of a woman who had been doing this alone for a very long time. "Stuart," she said flatly. "He didn't mean to." Old reflex. Marcus stopped just inside the door, not approaching the bed, not retreating. "How are you feeling?" "Like I passed out on courthouse steps in front of 3 law clerks and a camera crew from the local news." Her voice was dry, controlled. "What I'm feeling right now, Marcus, is not really your concern. You still had my name on your emergency card." Something shifted in her face barely, but he caught it. "I kept meaning to update it." "I know." Silence. The monitor beeped. Outside in the hallway, a cart rattled past. "She's okay," Lena said finally. "The baby." They checked. "Heart rate is good. I hadn't eaten since 6 in the morning, which is apparently not acceptable when you're 7 months along." The dry tone didn't quite cover what was underneath it. "They want to keep me overnight." "She," Marcus said. Lena looked at him. "You said she." The silence between them stretched out like the particular kind of silence that is not empty, but very, very full. "Marcus." Her voice was quieter now, the courtroom composure cracking slightly at the edges. "I need you to understand something before you say whatever you're about to say. I didn't keep this from you to hurt you, or to trap you, or to create some kind of leverage. I kept it from you because—" She stopped, pressed her lips together, started again. "Because the last 2 years of our marriage, your mother made it very clear what she thought of me, and you made it very clear by saying nothing, that her opinion mattered more than my dignity. I wasn't going to raise our daughter inside that dynamic. I wasn't going to let her grow up watching her father choose his mother's comfort over her mother's worth." The words landed in Marcus exactly the way she'd always landed arguments, precise, unhurried, leaving no room for a response that wasn't honest. "I know," he said. "It was inadequate and he knew it. I know I did that. Do you?" She wasn't angry. That was the worst part. She just looked tired and clear-eyed, the way people look when they've already processed the grief and come out the other side into something quieter. "Because for 14 months I've been preparing to raise her alone. I have an apartment in Lincoln Park. I have a crib. I have a pediatrician. I have a plan, Marcus. That doesn't include you, not because I wanted it that way, but because I learned not to count on you when it cost you something." Marcus crossed to the chair beside her bed and sat down without asking. She watched him do it, but didn't tell him to leave. "I'm not going to ask you to believe me tonight," he said. "You shouldn't believe me tonight. You've been in this hospital for 2 hours and you need to rest, and I've spent 14 months being exactly the man you had to leave." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hands clasped. "But I need to know her name." Lena studied him for a long moment. "I haven't decided yet," she said. "I've been calling her Ada." "Ada." Something in his chest cracked clean open. "That was my grandmother's name." "I know." Lena's voice was soft now, careful. "She was the only person in your family who ever treated me like I belonged." They sat in that for a moment, the ghost of Rosa Hale between them, 83 years old when she died. A woman who had pulled Marcus aside at his own engagement party and said, in her particular mixture of English and the Spanish she'd never quite left behind, "That woman loves you like a serious thing, not a convenient thing. You'd be a fool to make her doubt it." He had been exactly that fool. "My mother called me," Marcus said, "an hour ago. She heard from someone at the hospital, I don't know who, some connection through the hospital foundation she knows about the baby." He paused. "She's asking to meet me for breakfast tomorrow." Lena's expression didn't change, but her hands tightened slightly on her stomach. "What did you tell her?" I didn't answer. For the first time, something shifted in Lena's face that wasn't exhaustion or weariness, not quite hope, but an attention, a waiting. "Marcus, your mother has spent 4 years trying to convince you I wasn't suitable, that I was too focused on my career, too loud, too stubborn, not the right kind of woman for the image she had of your life. And you let her. Not cruelly. You were never cruel, but you let her chip away at what we had, one dinner at a time, one comment at a time, one silence at a time. Lena's eyes were steady on his. I need you to understand that I will not expose Ada to that. Not on her best day. Not even if Vivian Hale performs an authentic transformation. I will not let my daughter feel like a problem to be managed inside her own family. I know. Marcus's voice was rough. I need to tell you something that I should have said 2 years ago. My mother does not get to define what my family looks like. She never did. I gave her that power because it was easier than the alternative, and the alternative was standing in front of her and telling the truth that the life she wanted for me was not the life I wanted, and that you were not a liability in that life. You were the reason it was worth living. Lena was quiet. That's a beautiful thing to say at midnight in a hospital room, she said finally. It's also just true. Beautiful things that are also true are the most dangerous kind. But there was something in her voice now, a softness she hadn't allowed herself earlier. Marcus, I can't take you back. Not tonight, not because I don't. She stopped. Not because my feelings have changed, but because I spent 14 months learning to trust my own judgment again, and that took everything I had, and I won't undo it on the strength of a crisis and good intentions. I'm not asking you to take me back tonight. What are you asking? Marcus looked at her. Really looked at her, the way he'd stopped letting himself look for over a year. I'm asking to be Ada's father. Not a visitor. Not a check that arrives on the 1st of the month. Her father. I'm asking for the chance to prove that the man who failed you is not the man I intend to be. Before Lena could answer, her phone buzzed on the bedside table. She glanced at it and something changed in her face, a quick, controlled alarm she couldn't quite hide. What is it? Marcus asked. It's from Daniel Reyes. She said it carefully, watching his face. Marcus knew the name. Everyone in Chicago legal circles knew Daniel Reyes, a federal prosecutor, brilliant and relentless, who had been Lena's closest friend in law school and had never in 12 years made any secret of the fact that he thought Marcus Hale was wrong for her. He had been at their wedding. He had danced with Lena. He had found Marcus afterward and said, with a particular directness of a man who respected honesty above tact, "She's the best person I know. If you ever make her doubt that, I'll consider it a personal offense." What does he want? Marcus's voice was careful. He saw a post about a woman collapsing at the Daily Center. Someone from the news crew posted footage. Lena's jaw was tight. He recognized me. He wants to know if I'm okay and if I need anything. He's a good friend. He is. She typed a brief reply, set the phone down. He also offered, when I first found out I was pregnant, to help me, however I needed. He said the same thing, Ethan. She caught herself. He said he'd be there for me and for the baby, whatever form that took. The unspoken thing in the room was loud enough to be furniture. Do you want him here? Marcus asked. The question cost him something, but he asked it. Lena looked at him, surprised. No, not tonight. A pause. But Marcus, I need you to understand what it means that he made that offer and you didn't know I existed for 7 months. I know what it means. Do you feel it? Not just know it in your head, because understanding something intellectually is not the same as carrying it. Marcus was quiet for a moment. I feel it like something I can't put back. They sat together in the dimmed room, the monitor marking time between them. A nurse came in at midnight to check Lena's blood pressure and glucose levels, efficient and kind, and offered Marcus a blanket without being asked, which told him she'd seen a lot of people choosing to stay. He stayed. At 2 in the morning, when Lena finally drifted into an exhausted sleep, Marcus sat in the chair beside her bed and stared at the ceiling and thought about the morning, which was going to arrive whether or not he was ready for it. His mother called at 7. He answered this time, standing in the hospital hallway with a paper cup of terrible coffee, watching orderlies change shifts at the nurses' station. I heard, Vivian Hale said without preamble. I heard about the baby. Her name is Ada. Marcus kept his voice level. Your granddaughter's name is Ada. A silence. Marcus, we need to discuss this properly, not over the phone. Come for breakfast. Your father will be there, and I'm not coming for breakfast. Another silence, longer. I understand you're upset. I'm not upset, Mom. He said it gently, which surprised him. He'd expected to feel anger, and instead felt something closer to clarity. The kind of clarity that only arrives after you've already made the decision and are just waiting for the words to catch up. I'm not upset. I'm standing outside my ex-wife's hospital room at 7 in the morning because she collapsed yesterday carrying our daughter and had my name still on her emergency card, even though I gave her no reason to keep it there. I'm thinking about what kind of man I want to be when Ada is old enough to ask me who I was. Marcus, the way you treated Lena was not acceptable. It was never acceptable. I let it happen for 4 years because I didn't want to make things difficult, and I told myself I was keeping the peace, but I was just keeping myself comfortable while someone I loved paid the cost. His voice was steady. That's done. I need you to hear that clearly. Whatever happens with Lena, whatever she decides, Ada is my daughter, and she will not grow up watching her grandmother treat her mother like an inconvenience. She will not learn that love is conditional on meeting someone else's standards. I never said I didn't love you. I know you love me, Mom. That's not the question. A pause. The question is whether you can love the family I actually have instead of the one you planned for me. The silence on the other end went on long enough that Marcus thought she might hang up. She didn't. What would that look like? Vivian asked finally, and her voice was quieter than he'd heard it in years, maybe ever. What would you need from me? It was not an apology, but it was something he hadn't heard from her in 4 years of disagreement. A question she actually wanted the answer to. I'll tell you when I figure it out, he said. But it starts with you understanding that Lena is not the problem with my life. She was the best thing in it, and Ada is going to grow up knowing that. He went back inside. Lena was awake, sitting up, eating a breakfast of scrambled eggs with the focused efficiency of a woman who had learned to take care of herself because no one else was going to do it for her. Your mother? She asked without looking up. Yes. How did it go? Better than I expected. Not as well as it needed to. He sat down in the chair again, the one he was beginning to think of as his. She asked what it would take. I didn't have a full answer. Lena set down her fork. She asked what it would take. Yeah. For a moment, Lena looked at him with an expression he couldn't read. Then, that's the first time in 6 years she's asked, instead of told. I know. Marcus. Her voice was careful, measured, the way she was in court when she was about to say something that mattered. I'm not making any decisions about us today. I need you to understand that. I've been on my own for 14 months, and I've been okay, and I'm not going to collapse into your arms because you had one hard conversation with your mother. I know. But she stopped, started again. Ada is going to need her father. She deserves a father who actually shows up, not just financially, actually. She met his eyes. Can you do that? Yes. Even when it costs you something, even when my career makes things complicated and I'm in trial for 3 weeks straight, and Ada needs a dad who can cover bath time and daycare pickups. Yes. Even when my mother-in-law, your mother, disagrees with how we're raising her. She doesn't get a vote on that. She never did. He paused. I just forgot that for a while. Lena was quiet for a long moment, looking at her hands. Okay, she said finally. Okay, Marcus, we'll figure out what that looks like. But slowly, and honestly, if I see you going quiet and deferential the moment your mother applies pressure, I need you to know that I will protect Ada from that, whatever that requires. I would expect nothing less. Something that was almost a smile crossed her face brief. Guarded, but real. Don't make me sentimental. I have a hearing Friday. He was there when Ada was born 6 weeks later at 4:22 in the afternoon on a Thursday in March, during a snowstorm that delayed traffic across the city and made the hospital parking garage a chaos of stressed families and double-parked cars. Lena had texted him at noon with her characteristic directness, contractions every 8 minutes. Heading to Northwestern, you don't have to come, but the offer stands. He'd left a meeting with 7 people and a potential 8-figure client, and he'd apologized to no one. He held Lena's hand through 4 hours of labor. She didn't ask for pain medication. She didn't yell at him, which he took as either a good sign or a sign that she was conserving energy. When Ada arrived, small and loud and furious about the transition, her eyes squinting against the lights, Marcus cried in a way he hadn't since his grandmother's funeral. "Hi," he said, when the nurse placed Ada against his chest for the first time. "I've been looking forward to meeting you. I'm sorry I'm a little late getting started." Ada regarded him with the solemn, unfocused attention of someone with a great deal of processing to do. Lena watched from the bed, pale and exhausted and fierce. "She has your ears," she said. "Your stubbornness," he said. Those were not mutually exclusive. Daniel Reyes arrived at the hospital that evening with flowers and enough food from a Mexican restaurant 2 blocks away to feed the entire nursing floor. He shook Marcus's hand at the door of Lena's room with the careful assessment of a man who had watched someone he loved be hurt and was not yet ready to offer full absolution. "She trusts you," Daniel said quietly in the hallway. "I don't know why, but she does. Don't make it complicated for me to respect that." "I won't," Marcus said, and he meant it. Vivian Hale arrived the next morning. She was dressed simply, for her no jewelry except her wedding ring, no agenda that Marcus could see. She stood in the doorway of Lena's room and looked at her granddaughter in Lena's arms. And something in her face that had been held in careful composure for as long as Marcus could remember simply gave way. "She's beautiful," Vivian said. Her voice was unsteady in a way Marcus had never heard. Lena looked at her for a long moment. The silence in the room was the particular kind that exists at crossroads. "Her name is Ada," Lena said. "Would you like to hold her?" Vivian crossed the room with careful, deliberate steps, and when Lena placed Ada into her arms, she held her like something infinitely precious that she was terrified of damaging, which Marcus suspected was the most honest thing his mother had done in years. "I owe you an apology," Vivian said quietly, not taking her eyes off Ada. "I owe you several years of apologies. I thought I was protecting my son. I was actually just protecting my idea of him, which is not the same thing, and it cost you both enormously, and I am." Her voice caught. "I am deeply sorry for that." Lena was quiet for a moment. "I believe you mean that right now," she said finally. "I need to see you mean it over time." "That's fair." Vivian nodded, still looking at Ada. "That is completely fair." "One chance," Lena said. "Not because I owe you one, but because Ada deserves grandparents who earn that name. You get one chance. If you make her feel unwanted or less than, I won't make a scene. I'll just make sure she never has to be in the same room with you again." "Understood," Vivian said quietly. "I understand." Marcus stood in the corner of that hospital room watching the 2 women who had, between them, shaped the last decade of his life. The one who had asked too much and the one who had given everything sit together with his daughter, and he felt something settle in his chest that had been unsteady for a very long time. He didn't know yet what would happen with him and Lena. She had made no promises. She had been clear and honest and careful the way she was about everything that mattered. She had said slowly, and he intended to honor that with every day he had. What he did know was this. When he left the hospital that afternoon to handle 3 days' worth of deferred calls and a client who was threatening to walk, he came back by 6. He was back by 6 the next day, and the day after. Not with gestures or declarations, but with the quiet, unglamorous dailiness of a person choosing to be present, bringing food, handling logistics, sitting in the chair beside the bed and reading case files aloud to Lena, while Ada slept on his chest because it turned out she liked the vibration of his voice. 6 weeks later, Marcus and Lena sat on the back steps of her Lincoln Park apartment, while Ada slept in the monitor-equipped bouncer just inside the glass door. The April evening was cold enough for jackets and warm enough to bear the particular Chicago spring that felt like a negotiation. "I want to ask you something," Lena said, "and I need you to answer honestly, even if the honest answer is not what I want to hear." "Okay, do you actually want this?" "Not Ada. Ada is non-negotiable, and I know you love her. I mean this." She gestured between them, careful and small. "Because if you're here out of guilt, or because it feels like the right thing to do, or because your mother is watching and you want to prove something, I'd rather know that now than discover it in 2 years. Marcus was quiet for a moment. When you left, he said, I told myself it was the right thing. That you deserved to be free of my family's expectations. That I was releasing you. I spent 14 months believing that story. He looked at her. I don't believe it anymore. I know what it was. It was cowardice dressed up as consideration. I let you go because staying would have required me to change, and changing would have required me to disappoint my mother, and I had spent 41 years avoiding that particular discomfort. He paused. I don't want to do that anymore. Not because of Ada, and not because of guilt. Because I want to be a person I can actually respect. And the only version of me I've ever respected was the one who was trying to be worthy of you. Lena was quiet for a long time. Then she leaned sideways and rested her head on his shoulder, and he didn't move, didn't speak, just let the weight of it settle. Slowly, she said. Slowly, he agreed. Inside, Ada made the small sound she made when she was waking from a dream, not distress, just announcement. Marcus was on his feet before Lena had shifted, pushing open the glass door, crossing to the bouncer, picking up his daughter with the practiced ease of a man who had learned, over 6 weeks, that confident handling was what she preferred. Hey, he said softly. Hey, I've got you. Ada focused on his face with the serious concentration she brought to everything, and Marcus thought not for the first time that she already had her mother's way of making you feel genuinely examined. Your mom's right outside, he told her. She's not going anywhere. Neither am I. And he meant that, in a way, he never meant anything built for money or ambition or the careful accumulation of other people's approval. He meant it the way you mean things, when you've already paid the cost of meaning the opposite, and you know with the bone-deep certainty of someone who has finally stopped running that you will not make that mistake again. 2 years later, on a Tuesday morning in March, Marcus stood in the kitchen of the house they'd bought together in Evanston, a real house, impractically large and imperfectly renovated, with a backyard Ada had already claimed as her personal domain, making coffee while Lena got ready for what would become the most high-profile prosecution of her career. The case had been building for 8 months. 3 days until opening arguments. She emerged from the bedroom in her trial suit, Ada on her hip. The two of them deep in a conversation about whether bears hibernated in cities. They do not, Lena was saying, with the patient seriousness she brought to Ada's questions, but if one came to Evanston, I think it would find our backyard very acceptable. Could it stay? We'd have to ask Grandma Vivienne. She has opinions about backyard guests. Ada giggled. Vivienne had become, against all of Marcus's early expectations and most of Lena's, genuinely devoted. Not in the smothering way of her earlier years, but in the way of someone who had been handed a second chance and understood its value. She came on Sundays. She brought food and asked questions and followed Lena's lead without being told to. It had taken time. It had taken consistent, quiet effort on Vivienne's part that Marcus had not been entirely sure she was capable of. He'd have been glad to be wrong. She has an 8 o'clock today, Marcus said, taking Ada from Lena's arms, and a verdict to win. I have a case to try, Lena corrected, pressing a kiss to his jaw. Winning is not guaranteed. For you it basically is. She pulled back and looked at him with the expression she still sometimes wore, the one that said she was checking whether the man in front of her was still the man she decided to trust. He'd learned not to be defensive about it. She'd earned the right to check. Whatever she saw, she smiled. Don't be late for pickup, she said. I'm never late for pickup. You were late one time. There was a weather event. There was light drizzle. Ada watched this exchange with great interest, her head moving between them like she was tracking a tennis match. Mama wins, she announced. Mama always wins, Marcus agreed. After Lena left, Marcus stood in the kitchen with Ada on his hip and a cup of coffee going cold on the counter, and he looked out at the March backyard still dormant, stubbornly brown, but with the green beginning to push through at the edges the way it did every year when you weren't quite watching. He thought about the night Lena's name had appeared on his phone in Stewart's caller ID, the way the city had blurred below his office window, the 14 months of silence that had preceded it. He thought about how close he had come to being someone Ada would have grown up, knowing only on alternating weekends. Some things you couldn't undo. Some damage stayed in the record, visible if you looked, a reminder of how badly a person could fail at the most important job they'd ever been given. But damage wasn't the same as destiny. Marcus Hale had learned that later than he should have, at a cost that had not been his alone to bear. He was still learning every day. The particular discipline of staying present, staying honest, staying willing to be wrong and say so before anyone had to ask. It turned out that was the whole job. Not the money, not the approval, not the version of himself his mother had spent 40 years trying to perfect. Just this. Ada's hand in his, Lena's voice from down the hall. The grain coming back at the edges of things. Just choosing this again, every single day.